Now every time I dream, I always see this man. And he's burned and melted. And he's always trying to attack me with these knives.
On his fingers.
Oh my God. We're having the same dream.
This is Now Playing's A Nightmare on Elm Street retrospective series, hosted by Arnie.
Why are you screaming? I haven't even caught you yet.
Joining us now is Thomas Dekker, a writer, a producer, and an actor. You've probably seen him as John Connor in the Sarah Connor Chronicles. He was Picard's son in Star Trek Generations, and he played Jesse in 2010's Nightmare on Elm Street. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, how are you? Thank you for that introduction.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for joining us on the show. It's great to talk to you. So we're kind of looking back at Nightmare on Elm Street 2010. How did you get involved with that project?
The good old-fashioned way. I just auditioned. I actually was shooting this really independent, crazy little movie called All About Evil in San Francisco with Natasha Lyonne and Mink Stoll and Cassandra Peterson, and it was a wild time, and the whole crew were horror nuts, but specifically Nightmare on Elm Street nuts. And I just remember on the last day of shooting, the day we were wrapping, I got the email with the script and the sides and the character and the whole thing. And I remember joking with everybody, oh my God, imagine if I leave this and end up doing the new Nightmare on Elm Street. And I came home, I did one audition in LA. And then like a day later, I did a chemistry read with Katie Cassidy. And like the next day I had it. It was a really fast process.
And you were always going for the role of Jesse. I know sometimes actors go for one role and get a different one.
Yes, that has happened to me before, where I've gone in for one and gotten the other. But no, this one I was always for Jesse, and I believe Kyle was already cast as Quentin before I even went in. I think he might have been the first cast, if I remember correctly. It has been 50 years after all.
And you'd worked with some Nightmare on Elm Street fans, and obviously you were really young during the Nightmare on Elm Street heyday, not even born when the first three came out. But you'd have been a teenager around Freddy versus Jason, so had you seen any of the previous Nightmare films before your audition?
Yeah, ironically, the one I hadn't seen and still haven't seen is Freddy versus Jason, actually. I hear great things. But no, I was just such a horror nut from childhood on. I mean, I was a film nut in general, but horror particularly. So of course Nightmare on Elm Street was in my mind. And I think I'd seen all of them at that point. I know when I did it, I know I'd seen 1, 2, 3, 4. I know, 3 has always kind of been, I think 1 obviously is the indisputable classic. It built the house, but I really love Dream Warriors a lot and always have. Yeah, and of course, 2 is fun for gay reasons. So yeah, no, Nightmare on Elm Street was very much in my. And I remember saying, because at 21 or whatever I was, being ballsy, and I said to the producers before we even started shooting, I think on like the day I got the job, I said, you guys are really gonna have to pull out the stops with this one, because yes, all the horror movies that they'd remade at that point, Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Hitcher and Amityville Horror and all of them, they were beloved, but I felt none of them were as beloved as Nightmare on Elm Street. There's a kind of a solidarity and a queer love and a cult love that is specific to Nightmare on Elm Street. And I felt very much at the time that, wow, this is like really hallowed ground. Like we need to really tread lightly here.
And what was your feeling going in? You had the script, you had the role, but if you knew the others and you knew that they were special to a lot of people, what was your thought going in on how the approach went?
Well, it was intimidating, of course, but I'd sort of just gone through that with playing John Connor in the Terminator tale. I'd only wrapped the Terminator show maybe a month or a month and a half before I did Nightmare on Elm Street. I found out the show was canceled while filming A Nightmare on Elm Street, filming my prison scene. On our lunch break, I had a text message from the creator of Sarah Connor Chronicles, and he told me it was done. So I'd been through that, stepping onto, IP and beloved territory. I think the original script of this Nightmare remake was vastly different than what the finished product was. And I kind of knew that it would be, because what I really loved about the script was it was really dark, and it really got into Freddy is not a child killer. He was a pedophile, and they really wanted to the original script was really, all of us were really traumatized. The Nancy that Rooney Mara built was intended to be a total kind of shell of a person, and to not be the charismatic Nancy that we knew from the original. And of course, as we shot, as tends to happen when there's a lot of money involved, the powers that be, I think, started to get a little uneasy and a little panicked about how edgy this thing was. And so it started to shift as we shot it, and scenes that were originally to be shot were now cut and replaced with other things. And even we shot 2 whole different openings for the movie. The original opening was this big party scene at Kellen Lutz's character's house. And I get in this fight with him over Katie, and Rooney and Kyle meet for the first time. And I think he leaps off the roof or something was his death originally. We shot this whole thing. It was like a week worth of shooting in Chicago. And then they scrapped it, and we reshot a whole new opening in LA months and months later, where now, Nancy was the diner waitress that kind of knew everybody, which I felt was a disservice to the Nancy that Rooney had established and that we'd shot. So complications arose, and this isn't anything that people who've seen the movie, I think these are issues that some people have with the movie. I'm just trying to give a little bit of a explanation as to, how things shifted. But it's a typical Hollywood industry, when something really gets in the machine, risks must be mitigated. And so, but yes, to answer your question in the very long-winded way I did, I was intimidated but excited. And I was really excited by Jackie Earle Haley's idea of how to make this Freddy different, which was to treat him as a real burn victim. And so the movements and the voice and everything that he came up with was this kind of wounded, stuttering, gravelly, soft-spoken performance.
Rex was always one of my favorites. Right behind you. Do your homework, sweet pea.
But again, they later on had him ADR, a very different voice. The kind of Rorschach booming voice was all done in post.
Oh, God. No. Just me.
So that was another change that happened along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that they changed his voice. I did know of the different openings and the reshoots and things. And I was going to ask you about the party opening, because that would have been one of the few times like the whole main cast was together, right? Because we were introduced to you guys as a group in that original opening. And then in the new opening, it's all kind of like little isolated groups.
Yeah, I mean, they still, in the diner that does open the movie, we are all there, but we're sort of separated and in ways that we weren't in the original opening. In the original opening, there was this whole backstory between me and Kellen and Katie, this kind of, she was, I guess, into both of us, and this, which I found hilarious at the time. That this girl would have a choice between Kellen Lutz and me and be yeah, and it was more kind of like it was more like a teen movie opening, it was like kids are karaokeing and it's a party, and it had more of that kind of teenage vibe, whereas I think they went with a more like noir. It was immediately dark, this moody diner vibe. And to be honest, I don't know which was better for the film, because I never saw the original opening cut together. We shot it all, and then, but if I remember correctly, there's a shot from the original opening in the trailer that they originally released where Kellen's standing on the roof and there's a pool behind him. But I remember when I first saw the trailer, I was like, oh, a shot made it in.
Obviously, films aren't shot in order, so, your character dies a third of the way through, but how long were you involved with the shoot?
I was there the whole time. So I was there for the whole 3 months in Chicago. It was the summer in Chicago. And yeah, I actually I was there the whole time, but I had so much time off. I wrote and produced an entire album in my hotel room and recorded the vocals at this like legendary studio in Chicago. And I actually don't tell I believe it was the Peninsula Hotel we were staying in. I carved in the bottom of the desk, Thomas Dekker made album, blah, whatever, at this table. And I just brought my laptop and my keyboards, and because I had so much downtime. So it was, to be honest, when I think back on the movie, shooting it isn't what comes to mind first. What comes to mind first is Rooney and Kyle and I having a great time in Chicago and becoming fast friends and making an album. But it was a really beautiful summer to have as a 21-year-old. I mean, my God, how fortunate I was.
And is that album available anywhere?
It is. It's not out under my name because it was under an art collective I was part of at the time. But yeah, the album's called Equals Zero, and the project was called 0 times 0, OXO. And the album came out, I think, a year or so later. But yeah, that was the album made during the nightmare.
You'd been acting a long time when you did this role. What was the vibe like on the set overall? You'd even done some horror movies before and after that. What was it like, shooting Nightmare, which was, a Michael Bay production compared to the other stuff you'd been doing?
It felt similar to doing big TV shows, which I'd done quite a bit of at that point. Big set, big crew, every day kind of a big wow undertaking. And the production value of where we were shooting in in that paint factory, I think is what it was the, the industrial where all the nightmares happen and where I die and all that. So it was a daily kind of, wow, this is so impressive. But it definitely, I think for me, because I was such a horror person, and inspired by horror creatively, so I'd say more so than anyone else in the cast, certainly. I definitely would get frustrated when I would see certain things or certain, I was very protective of A Nightmare on Elm Street, and I was protective of what we were doing with the characters and with the story. And I think doing indie horror, the horror fan in me feels very like, okay, well, we're all on the same page here. We all want to do this because we love the genre. And I think a lot of people, of course, just on any giant movie, they're not doing it because they love the genre or they love the kind of movie. It's more like it's just work for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just was a definite adjustment. I think it was the first time I'd done, well, since childhood at least, that I'd done big studio horror. But it was fascinating. I mean, they were using technologies that were brand new. We used a robotic camera for a lot of the transitions from the real world to the nightmare world, like that great shot of Rooney in the grocery store aisle, and then it becomes the kind of hall of the industrial place, and just interesting stuff. And Jeff Cutter, the DP, was a really fascinating artist to watch.
You talked about the cinematographer. The director of this, Samuel Bayer, this was his, as of now, only feature film. He's done amazing work in music videos, but Nightmares was his first feature film. What was it like working with him?
Well, it was funny because I'm still friends with her, but I was good friends with Shirley Manson at the time because we'd just done Sarah Connor Chronicles together, and he'd done a lot of music videos for Garbage. So when I got this movie, I text her and I said, well, this Sam Bayer, what's he like? I don't remember what she said exactly, but it was something like, he's a genius, buckle up, or something. Because, he did come from a very different music video world where he liked to operate the camera himself and shoot it himself, and very hands-on and very involved. And so then suddenly having Jeff Cutter, this fabulous director of photography, he had to kind of step back a bit and relinquish the control in certain areas that I don't know if he was certainly not used to, and I don't know if he was really prepared for. I loved Sam. We had a good, funny working relationship. We had some spats here and there, but they were always kind of respectful, funny ones. And went to his art shows and stuff a lot for the years that followed. And I don't know, to be honest, why he hasn't made a film since. I'd assume it's by choice. But in terms of working with him, I had a good time. He was just kind of funny to me. I think I was funny to him. Yeah.
So your time in the film has two great death scenes involved. The first is, of course, your own. I think that's the most shocking one of the film. And then you're heavily involved in the death of Chris, played by Katie Cassidy. So I'll start with Chris's death first. There was some behind-the-scenes stuff on the Blu-ray that came out that had you there as somebody's being thrown around on the harness, sometimes Katie, sometimes the stunt woman. Did it require a lot of acting to respond to that when a human being is being flung around like that?
Yeah, I mean, it was literally like a week just shooting that one scene. And as you just noted, yeah, we had Katie on hydraulics and, suspended. We had a stunt person. Then we had a specific acrobatic stunt person who had just done Drag Me to Hell, all crazy, when she gets thrown around the room in that wild sequence. And we actually all went and saw Drag Me to Hell together in the theater while making Nightmare on Elm Street. And I remember that too. That was a really fun night. But I, for a week, all day, every day, just had to stand in my boxers and a t-shirt and scream. And, and Chris, no, and oh my God, It was very Shelley Duvall, The Shining, where it was just like every day, Groundhog Day, just be hysterical. And it was a lot of just standing there shouting. But I mean, it was really cool at the same time, again, to watch. And of course, just to be in that sequence, because for me, the most iconic sequence, just for me, in the original is that death scene. And so, I was thrilled about it. The one funny backstory I'll give about that scene was that originally I was supposed to just be in boxers only. And then the whole me running down the street and getting arrested and with breaking into Nancy's house, all of that, I was supposed to just be in my boxers covered in blood. So I got this trainer and I was on this crazy diet and I was like, I've got to look good. He's got to be this like jocular thing. And I put in all this work. And then like 2 days before, or maybe more, like a week before we're going to shoot it, they're like, yeah, no, we're going to have you t-shirt and boxers the whole time. So then suddenly I just went crazy with like Chicago deep dish pizza, like a motherfucker. And I gave up entirely on the body, but I digress. But yeah, that murder sequence was wild and very long. And then my death was again crazy. We were shooting 2 units at the same time in that paint factory. And so while they were doing stuff with Nancy, I believe, and Freddy underground, we were getting all the Steadicam coverage of me running through that factory. And we had, his name eludes me sadly, but we had one of the greatest Steadicam operators in the industry on that movie. And it was just him following me around and doing all these different shots, on this B unit. And then kind of similarly, again, in the script, it just said I was hanging when he says the line that I do love, where he says about the brain, keeps functioning after death or whatever. And originally I thought I was just hanging this way. And then like 30 minutes before we're shooting it, they're like, you're upside down, right? I'm like, oh, no, I didn't. But now I do. So yeah, I was hung from a kind of ankle harness. And I've done 2 movies where I've had to be hung upside down for long periods of time. And I can tell you it's not fun. It's a really unpleasant after a while. It starts to really not be too much fun. And then when you're having to scream and cry and do all the rest of it upside down, it's a lot. But I like my death scene. I like that my heart gets ripped out. And I don't know. And the one thing I will say on a semi-serious note was, which I appreciate that they allowed me to do, was it felt at that time, particularly the 2000s horror movies, it was like the women were always losing their minds, crying, screaming, hysterical, and the men never seemed to be remotely affected by what was going on. It was like there was too much fear of a male character not appearing macho enough that, he'd be in this terrifying scenario and just always be the like, I've got this, like, you stay back, woman, I'm okay. And I just refused to do that with this. And I wanted for my whole death sequence and all of that to just be weeping and shaking and just a terrified little fragile, naive, little boy, basically. And I appreciate that they allowed me to do that, because I was doing other projects at the time where that was very anti that. Don't show emotion, don't show weakness, don't. And maybe that's because, they suspected that I was gay and in the closet. So maybe they were just being super conscientious about it. I don't know. But it seemed in general, in the movies I was watching at the time, the men were never really allowing themselves to be wrecks of fear. And I'm glad that I got to do that as Jesse.
That was the scene you did with Jackie Earle Haley. What was it like to work with him? Oscar nominated at that point, coming off of Watchmen.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, my God, and I knew him from Little Children, that I thought he was amazing in. And I just remember, I think we all just felt bad for him, to be honest, because of the makeup. It was hours to get him in that. And I think an hour or two to get him out of it. And so he'd be working the same amount of hours we were, but with these additional 3 hours at the top of the day and 1.5 at the end of the day. And, but he couldn't have been lovelier. He couldn't have been a more respectful, wonderful actor to work with. And I will say, and we've all kind of agreed on this, that once he was in that makeup and once you were shooting with him and the glove came up and everything, it was very easy to play fear. He was, he didn't do the method thing where he sort of wouldn't talk to us or anything. We were very friendly with Jackie, but once we were doing the scene, it was very easy to be afraid of him.
Then when the movie came out, it did gangbusters. It was big success at the box office, not so loved critically. What was kind of your thought? It was almost a year between the time you filmed it and the time it came out. So what was your reaction seeing the final film and seeing, that fans were going in droves, but critics weren't embracing it so much?
Yeah, critics weren't embracing it, which I expected, because at least at that time, horror in general was still underappreciated by critics, and especially remakes. There was so much vitriol surrounding remakes at that time, and there still are today, and I understand why, and remakes are a complicated issue. But the fans, I mean, a lot of the fans, friends of mine who were fans of the original, were not wild about our movie. And I understand, I just, because it's the 15-year anniversary, I just did another talk about this film, and I understood the reaction then, and I understand it now. I think that it's really crucial to remember that all the tentpole horror franchises that we know and love, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they were all independent films originally. So there was this direct expression from the filmmaker. There was an urgency to what it was about, and it knew exactly what it was, and it was authentic. When you move that into the studio system and you multiply the budget exponentially, and if the amount of people involved goes up exponentially, it's bound to be a very different experience, because every single creative choice, there's like 60 voices attached to it, and all 60 want to be pleased, right? And then you're doing test group screenings and trying to please every single audience member. It just ends up in a place that doesn't have the kind of direct heart connectivity that the smaller version can have. So I was not really shocked, to be honest. I was expecting that reaction. But I also did feel, and I do feel today, there was a lot that was undervalued, underappreciated, and not really seen at the time, because everybody was just going in wanting what the original was, and wanting the original Nancy, and wanting the original Freddy, and the whole point of this was to not be that. Do I think that what it is like stellar 5 stars, A+? No, I think it has some issues, and I think there's definitely pieces of it that I'm not a fan of. But overall, I think it had a pretty harsh judgment at the time that maybe should be reviewed now, and the tide seems to have turned in what people think of this thing and feel about this thing.
You mentioned, the reshoots and the change of the script. Just in your own opinion, prognosticating the best you can, do you think the original conception would have gone over better, or do you think the changes improved the film?
It's really hard to answer, because I don't know if maybe it would have been too dark and too heavy and too serious, for what it is. It's a Nightmare on Elm Street. Like, I feel like maybe that might have swallowed up any whatever remaining like fun the movie did have. And I don't know, because I've always wondered, would it have been more successful if it had been darker and more shocking and more just, whoa, this is really fucked up? Would audiences have reacted to that stronger? Or would it have been better if it was a little more fun and a little more camp and a little less heavy and a little less dramatic and intense, and even then what the finished product is? So I don't really know. But I definitely think that some of the performances suffered from the decisions that were made. I think that Rooney, who I adore, turned in a really beautiful performance as Nancy. But again, it was a performance and a Nancy that was intended to be very different from Heather Langenkamp's Nancy. And it was predicated on being this shy, broken girl that didn't know anybody. And then this decision last minute to make her the diner waitress in town that everybody knows and like, hey, how's it going? I think really kind of set the rest of her performance up to crumble. And the same with Jackie, that including the makeup, it was all realistic burn victim makeup. It was to really go, they studied countless photos of this is what really happens to the skin, to the face in burn damage. And so this whole thing is built around, oh, he's this frail, wounded man who then has these outbursts. But then by ADRing the whole thing, the voice doesn't match the physical mannerisms. And so to me, that was always what suffered the most, was the performances, which is a shame because everybody in it is a really talented actor who really cared about doing a great job. But in terms of the rest of it, I don't know. I don't know what would have been a better direction.
A few years after this, you did co-star in Fear Clinic with Robert Englund. Did you two commiserate over any Nightmare on Elm Street memories there?
We absolutely did. So I did that movie because my friend directed it and wrote and directed it. And he'd asked me, if I would come and do this little indie in Ohio. And but then, of course, he said, Robert is doing it. And Robert actually was a fan of the Terminator show that I'd done. And when the Nightmare on Elm Street remake was announced, I don't remember where it was, but some con he was at, he'd done a panel. And, someone had asked him, what do you think of the cast of this new Nightmare on Elm Street? And he said, it was on video, it was on YouTube. He was like, well, I like Thomas Dekker from Terminator, so that bodes well. And so when I then met him to do this movie with him, I said, hey, thanks for, that shout out and, liking that I was joining the Nightmare universe. And to be honest, I don't remember if I asked him if he'd ever seen it or not. I don't remember talking to him about my Nightmare on Elm Street, but I, of course, asked him endless questions about his Nightmare on Elm Street, all of them. And Robert's a lovely guy. I mean, just one of the most entertaining, captivating, I would gladly do a 7-hour Robert Englund story hour where I can just sit there and he can just tell me stories. Just tell me it all. He's amazing.
He's an encyclopedia of film knowledge. I've had the joy of interviewing him, and he can bring in the references that you would never expect.
He's like a modern Bela Lugosi, or he has such reverence and respect for the theatricality of what a villain is. I mean, it really, I don't know if Freddy partially made him who he is today, or if Freddy went to him because he's always been like that, but it definitely feels like he was born to be Freddy Krueger, and yeah.
And then you did write, produce, and direct your own horror film, Jack Goes Home. I was curious, I've learned through this conversation you're a horror fan in general, but did your experience with Nightmare and Samuel Bayer give you any ideas of things to do or not to do when directing your own horror film?
I mean, of course, it's, every acting experience I've had has had some little piece of education in my filmmaking side. And, so I got to work for John Carpenter when I was 6 years old in Village of the Damned. And that was really, as ridiculous as it sounds, I knew then I wanted to direct just from watching him as a little kid. And I knew I wanted to do genre movies too, because it was already all my favorite movies at 7 years old were Carrie and The Shining and The Exorcist. There was no censorship in my house. So I was raised on pretty brutal adult horror at a very young age. And And yeah, so Nightmare on Elm Street, of course, it definitely played a part. I learned a lot visually on making that movie that I absolutely applied to Jack Goes Home. But yeah, I'd say just in overall, my experience in genre work very much was a part of it. And the whole reason that movie came to be was, it's a pretty autobiographical, semi-true account of my father dying and what I discovered about my childhood. And I wrote it in a depression, and I wanted to make a movie about it, but I didn't want to make some dreary navel-gazing drama. And I thought, the way I can make this interesting is to make it a horror and take the intensity of what I've experienced and twist it into a kind of psychologically explosive horror film. And I think that's the beauty of the genre, period. I think that horror, whatever, it's such an large umbrella term that covers so many different subgenres and kinds of films. But I think ultimately the one thing that it unilaterally can give to any project is that you can discuss things and look at things that you couldn't any other way. I mean, and even the parts of the Nightmare on Elm Street I'm in that did survive the original draft, the parts that don't shy away from the backstory, as it were. You're talking about like childhood trauma and some pretty heavy themes that you probably couldn't squeeze into a big summer movie any other way. And that's what I love about the genre, its capabilities.
So to veer off the Nightmare on Elm Street topic for a final question about your more recent work, you were in Star Trek Picard Season 3, and if I remember it right, it's been a couple years, but all your scenes were with Michael Dorn and Michelle Hurd. But in Generations, as I mentioned, you did play Patrick Stewart's son. But going to Picard, and obviously that episode was directed by Jonathan Frakes, did you have any chance to reconnect with Patrick Stewart and be like, remember me? I played this kid.
No, I didn't get to see him, and it was such a shame because I was really excited about it. Star Trek Generations was my first movie. I was 5 years old, and I remember my first grade or my kindergarten teacher or something was a huge Star Trek and Patrick Stewart fan, and my mom asked him to write an autograph for my teacher, which was, went over very well, if I correctly. And I also did Star Trek Voyager. It was a recur on Voyager for many episodes when I was 8, I think. And so, yeah, Star Trek has just been in my life always. And even doing Picard recently was weird because Michelle Hurd's husband is Garrett Dillahunt, who I'd done all of the Sarah Connor Chronicles with. So I knew Michelle through him, and I think had met Frakes back on Generations, maybe? We'd met before, but I didn't get to see Patrick again. And that was really, I would have loved, that would have been wild, but it sadly didn't happen.
This has been fantastic. Thank you for sharing your stories. We really appreciate this look back and you taking some time out of your schedule to do that.
Oh, no, I appreciate it so much. The movie has its love and it's not so much love, but I am proud of it and I'm proud to be in it and I'm proud to be a part of the Nightmare on Elm Street legacy in some tentacle form. And so thanks for letting me talk about it.
Now Playing is a Venganza Media production, copyright 2026. And no part of this show may be reproduced, repurposed, or redistributed without the written permission of Venganza Media Incorporated. All rights reserved.